What does it feel like to walk into your daughter's wedding? A day you've dreamed of for years, only to be reminded that the family she's marrying into sees you as a stain on their pristine reputation. That bitter sting hit me, Elena Rivera, as I smoothed the creases from my modest navy dress and stepped into the Regency Grand Hotel on Sophia's wedding day in May 2025. My heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and dread, a fragile smile tugging at my lips despite the unease coiling in my chest. I'd raised Sophia on my own, working grueling nights as a social worker to fund her education, beaming with pride when she earned her law degree from a top university. But today, as I crossed the threshold of this opulent venue, its marble floors gleaming under chandeliers that dripped with crystal, I felt like an intruder in a world that wasn't mine. Sophia's fiancé, Daniel Carter, came from a lineage of wealth, his family owning the state's largest hospital network, and his mother, Margaret Carter, had turned this wedding into a spectacle of their status. I knew I didn't fit their mold, but I hadn't expected just how far they'd go to remind me of that. The lobby buzzed with activity, staff darting about with trays of champagne flutes, their polished uniforms a stark contrast to my simple attire. I adjusted my purse, a worn leather bag I'd carried for years, and took a deep breath, the scent of fresh orchids filling the air. I'd always imagined this day as a celebration, a moment to see Sophia radiant and happy, but the weight of being an outsider pressed heavier with each step. I'd spent decades helping families through crises, foster placements, emergency interventions, late-night calls, but none of that seemed to matter to the Carters. To them, I was just a working-class widow, a social worker who didn't belong in their glittering orbit. Still, I was here for Sophia, and nothing would keep me from her side. Mama. Sophia's voice sliced through the lobby's hum, bright but tinged with strain. I turned to see her hurrying toward me, her dark curls bouncing, still dressed in jeans and a t-shirt instead of the wedding gown I'd pictured. Her smile was tight, her shoulders hunched in a way I knew too well, a sign of stress she couldn't hide from me. "You made it," she said, her voice a little too high. She reached for a quick hug, her arms barely wrapping around me before she pulled back, her hazel eyes darting around the lobby as if expecting someone to interrupt. "Of course, mi amor," I said, my voice soft with the warmth I always reserved for her. "I wouldn't miss your big day for the world." I reached out to touch her cheek, to ground us both in this moment, but she stepped back, her hands twisting together nervously. "Mama, I need to tell you something," she said, the words spilling out in a rush, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Daniel's family. They changed the seating arrangements." My stomach tightened, a familiar dread creeping in. I'd sensed trouble ever since Margaret Carter had taken over the wedding planning, her calls to Sophia laced with subtle demands and critiques. I'd heard the exhaustion in Sophia's voice during our late-night chats, the way she'd try to laugh off Margaret's suggestions about the guest list, the menu, even Sophia's dress. I'd hoped Margaret's control wouldn't extend to something as personal as the seating, but deep down, I'd braced for it. "What kind of changes?" I asked, keeping my tone steady despite the sinking feeling in my chest. Sophia hesitated, her fingers knotting tighter. "They moved you to the back table," she said, the words tumbling out like they burned her to say. "It's near the kitchen entrance. Margaret said it's because of the photographer setup, but..." Her voice trailed off, and she couldn't meet my eyes, her cheeks flushing with shame. The words hit like a slap, but I kept my composure, years of handling crises teaching me to stay calm under pressure. I pictured the layout, tucked away, out of sight, as if I were a servant rather than the mother of the bride. Before I could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "Sophia, what are you doing down here? The bridal suite needs you now." Margaret Carter strode across the lobby, her designer heels clicking against the marble with the precision of a metronome. Her tailored cream suit hugged her frame, diamonds glinting at her throat, and her icy blue eyes swept over me with barely concealed disdain. "Oh, Elena, you're here," she said, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a predator sizing up prey. I straightened my spine, refusing to shrink under her gaze. "Hello, Margaret," I said, my voice even. "The venue is stunning." Her smile tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing her face before she masked it. "Yes, we spared no expense for Daniel and Sophia," she said, her tone dripping with pride. It's a Carter family tradition to ensure perfection. She turned to Sophia, her voice sharpening. Darling, your hair appointment was 10 minutes ago. You're keeping everyone waiting, go. Sophia hesitated, her eyes flickering between me and Margaret, torn. I gave her a gentle nod. Go on, mi amor, I said softly. It's your day. Don't worry about me. Sophia bit her lip, then hurried off, casting one last apologetic glance over her shoulder as she disappeared down a corridor. The moment Sophia was out of sight, Margaret's facade dropped, her expression turning cold as the marble beneath us. She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a venomous hiss. Listen, Elena, she said, each word deliberate. I know Sophia insisted on having you here, but let's be clear, you don't belong with our circle. The Carters have a reputation to uphold, a certain standard. Your modest circumstances won't do for our wedding photos. She paused, her eyes raking over my dress, my bag, as if they offended her. You'll support Sophia from the back of the room, where you won't be in the way. And we've arranged for the staff meals to be served at your table. It seemed appropriate, don't you think? Her smile was sharp as glass, a final jab meant to cut deep. With a flick of her platinum blonde hair, she turned and walked away, her heels echoing like a warning as she rejoined her family across the lobby. For a moment, I stood frozen, the weight of her words crashing over me like a wave. Humiliation burned in my chest, mingling with the memories of all I'd sacrificed for Sophia. Nights spent reviewing her law school applications, extra shifts at the community center to cover her tuition, the pride I'd felt when she graduated top of her class. I'd raised a daughter who'd earned her place in the world, only to be relegated to a corner by a family who saw me as less than. I found my way to the ballroom, where the wedding would unfold in a few hours. The space was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light, fresh roses adorning every table, a string quartet tuning up in the corner, but my eyes were drawn to the back of the room. There it was, my table, half hidden behind a pillar, right by the swinging kitchen doors, a physical manifestation of Margaret's disdain. Mrs. Rivera? A young woman in a hotel uniform approached, her name tag reading Lila. I'm from Event Services. You're seated here. Her voice was gentle, her brown eyes brimming with sympathy. But I wanted to let you know. We know who you are. My cousin was in a foster crisis last year. You stepped in, got her placed safely. We all think it's wrong how they're treating you. If you need anything, just ask, the staff's on your side. Her words caught me off guard, a flicker of warmth cutting through the hurt. I remembered that night, a frantic call, a terrified girl, hours spent ensuring her safety. Thank you, Lila, I said, my voice steadier now. Then a thought struck, a spark of an idea that could shift the tide. I reached into my purse, pulling out my phone. Actually, I said, a small smile tugging at my lips, there is something you could help with. But first, I need to make a call. As I dialed Marcus Delgado's number, a hospital board member I'd helped during a funding crisis, I watched Margaret across the room, her laughter ringing false as she ordered staff around. This day wasn't over yet. What happens when the quiet strength you've honed through years of helping others becomes the weapon that appends a wedding designed to erase you? That's the power I, Elena Rivera, unleashed in the Regency Grand Hotel's ballroom on my daughter Sophia's wedding day in May 2025. I just hung up with Marcus Delgado, a hospital board member who owed me a favor after I'd secured funding for a critical care program during a budget crisis. Now, standing at the back of the ballroom near the kitchen doors, where Margaret Carter had banished me, I felt a spark of defiance flare into a blaze. The Carters had underestimated me, seeing only a social worker in a modest navy dress, not the woman who'd spent decades building networks of trust and impact. As the ballroom filled with guests, I watched Margaret orchestrate her perfect day, oblivious to the storm I'd set in motion with one phone call. What unfolded next was a rebellion that turned her carefully curated event upside down, proving that true power isn't in wealth, it's in the respect you earn. The ballroom was a vision of excess, a testament to the Carters' wealth and status. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over tables draped in silk, each centerpiece a cascade of white roses and lilies that must have cost more than my monthly rent. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their notes mingling with the murmur of guests. Men in tailored tuxedos, women in designer gowns dripping with jewels, their laughter sharp and performative. I sat at my assigned table, partially obscured by a marble pillar, the swinging kitchen doors behind me a constant reminder of Margaret's disdain. The staff meals she'd ordered for me sat untouched, their presence a silent insult. I overheard whispers from nearby tables, the kind meant to be heard. "Is that the mother?" "The social worker?" one woman asked, her tone dripping with pity. Margaret's voice carried in response, just loud enough to sting. "Yes, unfortunately. But don't worry, we've kept her out of sight. We can't let her modest circumstances ruin Daniel's big day." Her words were a knife, but I held my composure, my years of navigating crises teaching me to stay calm under pressure. I checked my watch. 2:45 p.m. The ceremony was set for 3:30, and the guests were still arriving, their chatter growing louder as the room filled. The Carters moved through the crowd with practiced grace, Margaret air-kissing cheeks, her husband Richard shaking hands with a politician's smile. Sophia was still upstairs in the bridal suite, likely being primped to Margaret's exacting standards. I thought of her strained smile in the lobby, the way she'd apologized for the seating with shame in her eyes, and my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about me, it was about Sophia, about ensuring her day wasn't tainted by the Carters' snobbery. Lila, the young event staff member who'd offered her support, caught my eye from across the room, giving a subtle nod. The plan was in motion. It started quietly, a ripple that grew into a wave. Lila and 3 other servers, stationed near the appetizer table, began peeling off their crisp black uniforms, revealing casual street clothes underneath. Jeans, t-shirts, a flannel jacket. They moved with purpose, walking straight through the middle of the ballroom toward the exit, their trays abandoned on a nearby table. Guests turned, confused, as the quartet's music faltered for a beat. Margaret's head snapped up, her champagne flute freezing midway to her lips. "Where are you going?" she called, her voice sharp with indignation. "We haven't even served the appetizers." Lila turned, her chin high, her voice steady. "We quit," she said simply, her words cutting through the room like a blade. Before Margaret could respond, more staff followed suit. 2 bartenders at the open bar began packing up their tools, bottles clinking as they dismantled the setup. The valet parking attendants outside, I could see them through the glass doors, walked off their posts, keys jangling as they headed for the street. Even the wedding coordinator, a stern woman in a headset who'd been glued to her laptop, closed it with a decisive snap and strode toward the exit, her heels echoing in the stunned silence. The ballroom descended into chaos. Guests murmured, their voices rising in a crescendo of confusion. "What's happening?" a woman in a glittering gown whispered to her companion. "They can't just leave," another man barked, clutching a martini. Richard Carter, his face reddening, shouted toward the coordinators retreating back, "We'll sue for breach of contract." Margaret's composure cracked, her face flushing an alarming shade of red as she stormed toward Lila, who was nearly at the door. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill, echoing off the chandeliers. "You can't just walk out. We have a contract." Before Lila could answer, a deep voice boomed from the ballroom entrance, commanding immediate attention. "Actually, they can." Marcus Delgado stepped into the room, his presence a force of calm amid the storm. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, his graying hair swept back, he carried the authority of someone who'd built a hospital empire from the ground up. As the CEO of the Regency Grand's parent company, his word was law in this venue, and I had to suppress a smile as Margaret's expression shifted from anger to confusion to desperate charm in the span of seconds. She hurried toward him, her heels clicking frantically. "Mr. Delgado, there must be some mistake," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We booked this venue months ago, and now your staff is abandoning us." Marcus raised a hand, cutting her off. "No mistake, Mrs. Carter," he said coolly. "The Regency Grand will not be able to host this event as planned today. All staff have been instructed to cease operations immediately, per my direct orders. The room erupted. Guests stood, some clutching their pearls, literally, while others pulled out phones to record the drama. Richard shouted over the din, "This is outrageous. I'll have my lawyers on this by tonight." Sophia, who must have heard the commotion, appeared at the ballroom entrance, still in her bridal prep robe, her face pale. "Mama, what's happening?" she called, pushing through the crowd to reach me. Before I could answer, Marcus spotted me near the kitchen doors and smiled warmly. "Elena, there you are," he said, his voice carrying over the chaos. Margaret's head whipped around so fast I thought she might snap her neck. You know each other," she stammered, her composure crumbling entirely. Marcus laughed, a deep, genuine sound that silenced the room. "Know her. Elena Rivera saved my daughter's life during a foster care crisis last year. She stayed up 36 hours straight, coordinating with authorities to ensure her safety, even when every other agency had given up. I told her then, anything she needs, anytime, I'd make it happen." He turned to me, his eyes warm with gratitude. When Elena called to tell me how she was being treated at her own daughter's wedding, I knew we couldn't stand by. The pieces began to fall into place for the guests, their murmurs shifting from confusion to shock. I could see the dawning horror on Margaret's face as she realized her mistake, her carefully constructed hierarchy unraveling before her eyes. "More than that," Marcus continued, addressing the room, "Elena sits on the board of directors for our hospital group's charitable foundation. She's directed millions in funding to underprivileged communities, rural clinics, foster programs, mental health initiatives. When she told me she'd been relegated to a back table, served staff meals, and treated like an embarrassment, I knew the Regency Grand wouldn't associate with that kind of behavior." Sophia, now at my side, stared at me, tears brimming in her hazel eyes. "Mama, why didn't you ever say anything?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I squeezed her hand, my own eyes misting. "I wanted you to make your own way, mi amor," I said softly. "I never wanted my connections to influence your choices. But I also won't let anyone treat us like we're beneath them." Margaret sputtered, her face a mask of disbelief. "This is ridiculous. You can't just shut down our wedding. Do you know how much we spent on this?" Her voice was shrill, her hands flailing as she gestured to the floral arrangements, the quartet, the imported champagne. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not shutting it down, Margaret," I said, meeting her gaze. I nodded to Marcus, who gestured to the staff waiting by the doors. They began wheeling in new serving carts, fresh waiters entering the ballroom in crisp uniforms, their faces determined. "I'm taking over," I continued. "The wedding will proceed if Sophia and Daniel still want it to, but under new management and new seating arrangements." Daniel, who'd been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "Mrs. Rivera, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I had no idea my parents were treating you this way. I should have spoken up for you and Sophia sooner." Sophia, tears streaming down her face, turned to me. "Mama, I'm sorry too. I should have fought for you." I wiped a tear from her cheek, my heart swelling. "No more apologies," I said firmly. "This is still your day. Let's make it a good one." I turned to the gathered guests, my voice steady. "Everyone who'd like to stay and celebrate Sophia and Daniel's wedding is welcome, as long as they understand that in this room, everyone is equal. Everyone is family." The transformation was immediate. The Carters, thoroughly humbled, retreated to a corner, their social dominance shattered. The other guests, freed from the atmosphere of judgment, began to relax, their laughter softer, more genuine. Sophia, still in her robe, looked at me with a mix of awe and gratitude, her glow returning as she prepared to change into her gown. The ceremony, slightly delayed, began under my oversight, the quartet striking up a new song as I took a front-row seat, Lila giving me a discreet wink from the sidelines. The day I'd feared would break me had instead become a testament to the power of standing up, and the allies I'd earned along the way. What if the day you were meant to be erased from your daughter's wedding became the moment your life's quiet impact was revealed, opening doors to a future you never imagined? That's the unexpected gift I, Elena Rivera, received during Sophia's wedding reception at the Regency Grand Hotel in May 2025. After taking control of the event, turning Margaret Carter's snobbery on its head with the help of Marcus Delgado and the loyal hotel staff, I stood in the transformed ballroom, watching the atmosphere shift from pretension to genuine joy. The Carters had tried to diminish me, seating me at the back with staff meals, but their plan had backfired spectacularly. Now, as the reception unfolded under my oversight, I felt a quiet triumph, a validation of the decades I'd spent helping others as a social worker. But the day held one more surprise, a revelation that would not only redefine my place in Sophia's new family, but also cement a legacy far greater than the Carters' shallow status. This was the moment I realized that true victory isn't about proving others wrong. It's about living your truth and letting it shine. The reception was a stark contrast to the Carters' original vision. The ballroom, once a stage for their social hierarchy, now buzzed with a warmth that felt like family. The string quartet played a soft melody, their notes weaving through the laughter of guests who mingled freely, no longer bound by the Carters' rigid expectations. Tables were rearranged, my front row seat a quiet statement of my reclaimed place, and the staff, under Lila's lead, served a revised menu of elegant dishes, the staff meals long discarded. Margaret and Richard Carter sat at the very table they'd assigned me, near the kitchen doors, their faces a mix of defeat and embarrassment. Richard scrolled his phone obsessively, likely calculating the social fallout, while Margaret sipped her champagne with a tight-lipped grimace, her once commanding presence reduced to a shadow. I almost felt sorry for them, almost, but their humiliation was a consequence of their own making, a lesson in humility they'd never forget. Guests approached me throughout the evening, their curiosity genuine now, not tinged with the pity I'd overheard earlier. A woman in a sapphire gown, her husband a local councilman, asked about my work with foster programs, her eyes bright with interest. "I had no idea you were on the hospital charity board," she said, her tone warm. "Your rural clinic initiatives. My sister's a nurse in one of those areas. She says it's changed everything." I smiled, humbled by the recognition. "I've always believed in access for everyone," I said. "No one should be left behind." Another guest, a doctor who'd worked with one of my programs, thanked me for securing mental health funding that had saved his clinic. Each conversation was a reminder of the lives I'd touched, the impact I'd made without seeking the spotlight. The Carters had seen me as just a social worker, but these people saw the truth. My work had built bridges where they'd built walls. As the evening progressed, Daniel Carter, Sophia's new husband, approached my table, his expression a mix of nerves and determination. He was handsome in his tuxedo, his dark hair neatly styled, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Mrs. Rivera, could we talk privately for a moment?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, following him to a quiet corner near the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights twinkling beyond the glass. He took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly. "I've made some decisions," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm stepping away from my family's hospital administration role." My eyebrows rose in surprise. I hadn't expected this. "Daniel, that's not necessary," I said gently. He shook his head, resolute. "It is. I went into admin because it was expected, but I've always wanted to help people directly. I'm applying to medical school, like Sophia. I want to make a difference the way you do." His words caught me off guard, a swell of pride rising in my chest. "Sophia never mentioned this," I said, my voice soft. "I never told her," Daniel admitted, a sheepish smile tugging at his lips. "I was afraid of disappointing my parents. But after seeing you today, how you handled everything with such grace, such strength, I realized I've been trying to please the wrong people. You showed me what real impact looks like." I placed a hand on his arm, my heart warming. "That's a brave choice, Daniel," I said. "Sophia will be so proud of you, and I am too." He nodded, gratitude in his eyes, and returned to the dance floor, where Sophia waited, radiant in her gown, her smile brighter than I'd seen all day. Before I could rejoin the celebration, Marcus Delgado appeared at my side, his navy suit impeccable as ever. "Elena, there's someone here who'd like to speak with you," he said, his tone warm but tinged with excitement. He gestured toward the ballroom entrance, where an elegant woman in a tailored emerald dress stood, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized her. Dr. Evelyn Harper, the state health director, a woman I'd worked with on several community initiatives. "Elena Rivera," she said warmly, approaching with a confident stride. "I'm so glad I could make it, even if I'm fashionably late." Margaret and Richard, who'd been watching from their table, practically tripped over themselves to rush over, their faces a mix of desperation and flattery. "Commissioner Harper. What an honor." Margaret gushed, her voice syrupy. Evelyn cut her off with a cool glance. "I'm here to speak with Elena," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She turned to me, her smile genuine. "The board meeting is next week, and I wanted to discuss this in person," she began. "We've reviewed your proposal for the new community health initiative, expanding rural clinics with mobile units. We're not just approving it, we're doubling the funding." The Carters' jaws dropped in perfect unison, their shock almost comical. "But more than that," Evelyn continued, her voice carrying across the now quiet room. "I'm retiring next year, and the governor has asked for my successor recommendation. I'd like to put your name forward, Elena, if you're interested." The ballroom hushed, guests straining to hear, their earlier chatter replaced by stunned silence. Sophia, who'd been dancing with Daniel, slipped her hand into mine, her eyes wide with awe. "Mama, you never told me about any of this," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I squeezed her hand, my own eyes misting as I looked at her. "I've always believed our work should speak for itself, mi amor," I said softly. "All those nights I was working extra shifts, I was also building relationships, creating programs, finding ways to help more people. I never needed the recognition, I just wanted to make a difference." Evelyn nodded, her expression one of deep respect. "And that," she said firmly, "is exactly why you're perfect for the position." Margaret, her face pale, sputtered. But she's just a social worker." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her tone icy. "Just a social worker? Mrs. Carter, Elena Rivera has done more for healthcare access in this state than your entire family's hospital network. While you were planning galas and obsessing over social status, she was saving lives and changing systems from within." Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "Commissioner Harper, I'd love to hear more about the initiative," he said. "I'm applying to medical school, I want to contribute." Margaret, her composure shattered, interrupted, her voice shrill. "Medical school? You're supposed to take over the family business." Daniel turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "No, Mother," he said firmly. "I'm going to make my own way, like Sophia did, like Mrs. Rivera taught her to do." The reception continued, but the Carters retreated to their table, their social standing thoroughly dismantled. Guests now surrounded me, eager to discuss my work, my vision for rural healthcare, and the potential of a health director role. I answered their questions with humility, but my heart was with Sophia, who watched me with a pride I'd never seen before. As Sophia and Daniel shared their first dance, the quartet's melody swelling, I stepped onto the hotel's terrace, needing a moment to breathe. The city lights stretched out before me, a glittering reminder of the world beyond this day. Sophia joined me, her gown shimmering in the moonlight, her expression soft. "Mama, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "Not just for today, but for pulling away, trying to fit into Daniel's world. I forgot who I am, who you taught me to be." I turned to her, seeing the little girl who'd once fallen asleep with law books, dreaming of justice. "You never have to apologize for finding your way," I said, pulling her into a hug. "But remember, your value isn't in who you marry or what family you join. It's in what you do, how you treat people, the difference you make." She wiped a tear, careful of her makeup, and smiled. "Health Director Rivera?" I laughed, the sound light with possibility. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Why not? She teased. After today, anything's possible. We stood there, mother and daughter, the city sprawling beneath us, and I felt a deep peace. The Carters had tried to put me in my place, not realizing I'd built my own, a foundation of respect, dignity, and impact they couldn't touch. Next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Staff can't stop talking, you're a legend here. I smiled, replying, best revenge is living your truth. As I headed to work, patients awaiting my care, I knew my legacy wasn't in titles or recognition. It was in every life I'd touched, every program I'd built, and the daughter who'd learned to stand tall. The Carters saw a social worker. I saw a life of purpose. And that was the greatest victory of all.